Jamal was no stranger to hardship. At just 15 years old, he carried the weight of responsibility far beyond his years. His life was set in the heart of a bustling urban neighborhood where the streets buzzed with activity from dawn to dusk. Narrow alleys snaked between rows of weathered houses, each bearing signs of wear and tear that spoke of years of struggle. Vendors with carts overflowing with fruits and vegetables lined the streets, their calls blending with the constant hum of car engines and the chatter of passers-by. Amid this chaos, Jamal's small world revolved around his family, a modest home, and dreams that reached far beyond the confines of his surroundings. The house he called home was far from perfect, but it radiated a warmth that no luxury could replicate. The faded paint on the walls and the creaky wooden floors told stories of resilience. Jamal's mother, a fiercely determined woman, had done her best to create a space of comfort and love despite their limited means. She worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and the lights on, often sacrificing her own needs to ensure her children had a chance at a better life. The family's tiny living room was a mix of hand-me-down furniture and thrift store finds, but it was adorned with photos capturing moments of joy, a testament to their ability to find happiness in even the most challenging times. Jamal's siblings, an energetic pair of twins just 5 years old, looked up to him as both a big brother and a father figure. Their laughter echoed through the house, a bright contrast to the struggles that often loomed in the background. Jamal took his role seriously. He woke up before the sun most days, helping his siblings get ready for school while his mother prepared for her long shifts. He'd tie their shoelaces, pack their lunches, and walk them to the nearby school before heading to his own classes. At school, Jamal stood out not for his clothes, which were often second-hand, or his shoes, which had seen better days, but for his sharp mind and kind heart. Teachers frequently praised his quick grasp of subjects and his ability to think critically. Yet what set Jamal apart the most was his unwavering willingness to help others. Whether it was explaining a tough math problem to a struggling classmate or picking up books that someone had dropped in the hallway, Jamal seemed to have an endless supply of empathy. After school, Jamal's routine was a delicate balance of responsibilities. He ran errands for his mother, helped his siblings with their homework, and managed to squeeze in time for his own studies. But no matter how busy he was, Jamal always found time to lend a helping hand. He often assisted neighbors with small tasks, fixing a leaky faucet, carrying groceries, or simply listening to their worries. To Jamal, kindness was a currency he could afford to spend, even if his pockets were often empty. One particularly busy evening, as Jamal walked home with a bag of groceries in one hand and a textbook in the other, he noticed an elderly woman struggling to cross the street. Her legs trembled under the weight of the bags she carried, and cars zipped past, indifferent to her plight. Without a second thought, Jamal darted across the street, gently taking the bags from her hands and guiding her safely to the other side. "Thank you, young man," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "The world needs more people like you." Jamal smiled and replied, "It doesn't take much to help, ma'am. Have a good evening." This was Jamal's way. He didn't perform acts of kindness for recognition or reward, it was simply who he was. Yet behind his unshakable positivity, there were moments when Jamal couldn't help but feel the weight of his circumstances. At night, after everyone else had gone to bed, he would sit by the dim light of a small desk lamp and dream of a future where his family no longer had to struggle. He imagined himself as an engineer, designing solutions to make life easier for people like his mother, who worked tirelessly but never seemed to catch a break. Jamal's dreams weren't fueled by bitterness or anger at the challenges he faced, but by a deep desire to create a better world. His mother's words often rang in his ears: "Kindness costs nothing, but it can open doors you never knew existed." Jamal took those words to heart, believing that every small act of goodness he put into the world would come back in ways he couldn't yet foresee. One bright morning, Jamal set out to run an errand for his mother. The sun was high in the sky, casting a golden hue over the streets. He had a list of groceries tucked into his pocket and a determination to get everything his mother needed, even if it meant visiting multiple stores to find the best prices. As he walked, the familiar sounds of the neighborhood surrounded him: children laughing as they played tag, vendors calling out their wares, and the rhythmic clatter of a distant construction site. The scent of freshly grilled corn wafted through the air, mixing with the faint aroma of spices from a nearby food stall. Jamal was lost in thought, mentally ticking off the items on his list, when a sleek black car sped past him, Its polished surface gleamed under the sun, a stark contrast to the dusty streets. Jamal barely had time to notice it before he heard the loud screech of tires. He looked up to see the car coming to an abrupt halt just a few meters ahead. The sight was unusual for the neighborhood. Expensive cars like that rarely ventured into these parts, where potholes and uneven roads were the norm. Intrigued, Jamal quickened his pace to see what had happened. As he approached, he noticed a man stepping out of the driver's seat. Dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place against the backdrop of crumbling buildings, the man looked frustrated. He bent down to examine the rear tire, which had gone completely flat. Jamal hesitated for a moment, unsure if his help would be welcome. The man seemed like the kind of person who was used to solving problems with a quick phone call and a credit card, not with the hands-on solutions Jamal was accustomed to. But as he watched the man struggle, Jamal's instinct to assist kicked in. Taking a deep breath, he walked up to the man and said, "Excuse me, sir. Do you need some help?" The man looked up, his sharp features softening slightly as he took in the sight of the boy. Jamal's clothes were simple, and his shoes were worn, but his demeanor exuded confidence and a genuine willingness to assist. "I don't suppose you know much about fixing tires," the man said, his tone carrying a hint of skepticism. Jamal smiled. "I've helped my uncle with a few. Let me take a look." As Jamal got to work, using the tools the man had in the trunk, he chatted with him. The man introduced himself as Mr. Carter, a businessman who had taken a wrong turn and ended up in the neighborhood. Despite his initial frustration, Mr. Carter found himself impressed by Jamal's resourcefulness and determination. Within minutes, Jamal had the spare tire in place and the car ready to go. "You're a good kid," Mr. Carter said, handing Jamal a business card. "If you ever need anything, give me a call." Jamal took the card with a polite nod, not thinking much of it. For him, helping someone was its own reward. As Jamal watched the car drive away, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was different. What he didn't realize was that this small act of kindness was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. Have you ever helped someone and wondered how it might change your life? Share your story in the comments below. Let's spread the power of kindness together. The sun was setting as Jamal made his way back home. His hands carried a modest bag of groceries, just the essentials his mother had asked him to pick up. The air was alive with the typical chaos of his neighborhood, the shouts of children playing in the alleyways, the occasional honk of impatient drivers, and the chatter of street vendors advertising their wares. It was a soundtrack Jamal had grown accustomed to, one that felt both familiar and comforting despite the struggles it often masked. As he rounded a corner, a sharp screeching sound caught his attention. The noise startled him, and he looked up just in time to see a sleek, black luxury car coming to an abrupt halt a few meters ahead. Its tires left faint skid marks on the cracked asphalt, and the car tilted slightly to one side, its rear tire completely flat. Jamal paused, curious. Cars like that rarely appeared in his neighborhood, and when they did, it was usually for a brief and unremarkable reason. This one, however, seemed out of place. The car's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed almost immune to the dust of the streets. His polished shoes glinted faintly in the fading light, and the silver watch on his wrist gleamed as he raised a hand to shield his eyes while inspecting the situation. The man walked to the rear of the car, his frustration evident in the way he sighed and muttered under his breath. After a moment, he pulled out his phone and began dialing, his movements brisk and efficient. Jamal hesitated. The man didn't look like someone who would welcome help, especially not from a teenager carrying a bag of rice and vegetables. Yet something compelled him to step forward. He watched as the man frowned, lowering his phone with an annoyed shake of his head. It seemed no one had answered his call. Jamal took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of his bag, and approached cautiously. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice steady but respectful. "Looks like you've got a flat tire. Need some help?" The man turned sharply, his sharp gaze landing on Jamal. For a moment he said nothing, his eyes taking in the boy's appearance. Jamal's clothes were clean but clearly well worn, and his sneakers had seen better days. The man's expression was unreadable, somewhere between curiosity and skepticism. "Do you know anything about fixing tires?" he asked finally, his tone clipped but not entirely dismissive. Jamal nodded. "A little," he replied. I've helped my uncle with a few. If you've got a spare tire, I can try." The man hesitated, then gestured toward the trunk of the car. "Fine. Let's see what you can do." Jamal followed him to the back of the car as the man opened the trunk, revealing a spare tire and a basic set of tools. They weren't the best tools for the job, but Jamal had worked with worse. He set his grocery bag aside and got to work, carefully removing the damaged tire and replacing it with the spare. His hands moved with practiced precision, his movements efficient and calm. The man stood nearby, watching in silence. "You seem pretty young to know all this," the man remarked after a while, his tone still carrying a hint of skepticism. "My uncle's a mechanic," Jamal explained, not looking up from his task. "I've helped him out a few times. It's not that hard once you know what you're doing." The man nodded slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jamal," the boy replied. "And you?" "Richard Carter," the man said simply. There was a weight to his name, as though he expected Jamal to recognize it, but the boy merely nodded politely and continued his work. The name didn't mean anything to him, but there was something about Mr. Carter's demeanor that suggested he was someone important. Jamal finished tightening the last bolt on the spare tire and leaned back, wiping his hands on his jeans. "All done," he said, standing up. "You're good to go now." Mr. Carter inspected the tire, nodding in approval. "You did a good job," he admitted. "Thank you." Jamal shrugged modestly. "No problem. Just glad I could help." Mr. Carter reached into the pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek business card. He handed it to Jamal, who accepted it with a curious glance. The card was simple but elegant, with Mr. Carter's name embossed in bold letters alongside a phone number. "If you ever need anything," Mr. Carter said, his tone more sincere now, "give me a call." Jamal nodded, tucking the card into his pocket. "Thank you, sir," he said, though he doubted he'd ever actually use it. He stepped back as Mr. Carter climbed into his car. The engine roared to life, and Jamal watched as the vehicle disappeared down the street. For a moment he stood there, thinking about the encounter. Then, shaking his head, he picked up his groceries and continued on his way. When he got home, Jamal placed the groceries on the kitchen counter and pulled the card out of his pocket. He showed it to his mother, explaining what had happened. "This guy had a flat tire," he said. "I helped him out. And he gave me this." His mother frowned as she took the card, studying it carefully. "Richard Carter," she murmured. "Sounds like someone important." "He said to call him if I ever needed anything," Jamal added, though he sounded doubtful. His mother handed the card back to him, her expression cautious. "Jamal, don't get your hopes up," she warned gently. "People like that, they don't usually follow through on things like this. It's good that you helped him, but don't expect anything more." Jamal nodded, tucking the card back into his pocket. He knew his mother meant well, but her words planted a small seed of doubt in his mind. Maybe she was right. Maybe Mr. Carter's offer had been nothing more than a polite gesture, a way to acknowledge Jamal's help without any real intention behind it. His younger siblings, however, were fascinated by the story. Was the car really that shiny, his little brother asked, his eyes wide with excitement. Did it have one of those fancy seats that look like they're from a spaceship? Jamal laughed, ruffling his brother's hair. "It was pretty nice," he admitted. "But I think the guy just wanted to get out of here as fast as he could." That night, as Jamal lay in bed, he found himself replaying the encounter in his mind. Mr. Carter's sharp suit, his polished demeanor, and his unusual presence in the neighborhood had all seemed slightly out of place. And then there was the card, sitting in the drawer beside Jamal's bed. Who was Mr. Carter, really? What kind of life did he lead? And why had he given Jamal the card at all? Over the next few days, life returned to its usual rhythm. Jamal went to school, ran errands for his mother, and helped his siblings with their homework. The card remained in his drawer, mostly forgotten as the demands of daily life took over. Yet, every now and then, Jamal would catch himself wondering about Mr. Carter. Who was he? And why had their paths crossed in such an unexpected way? The morning was quiet, the way mornings often were in Jamal's neighborhood before the city fully woke up. The light filtered through the worn curtains of their modest home, and the sound of a distant street vendor calling out his wares drifted in through the open window. Jamal was in the kitchen, helping his mother prepare breakfast, when the low, rumbling sound of an engine outside caught his attention. It wasn't the usual sputter of old cars common in their area. This was something different, deep, refined, and unmistakably powerful. Jamal glanced out the window and froze. Parked in front of their small house was a sleek black SUV. Its polished exterior reflected the early sunlight, and its tinted windows gave it an air of mystery. The vehicle looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of cracked sidewalks and weathered homes. For a moment, Jamal wondered if it had taken a wrong turn, but then the driver's door opened. A man in a crisp black suit stepped out, holding a slim envelope in his hand. He moved with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he approached their front door. By now, the neighbors had noticed. Curtains shifted, and faces peeked out from behind windows, curiosity etched across them. The sound of hushed whispers carried through the air as the neighborhood watched the unexpected visitor. Jamal, his mother called, her voice laced with caution. "Who is that?" "I don't know," Jamal replied, his brow furrowing in confusion. He set down the plate he was holding and moved toward the door, just as the man knocked firmly but politely. Jamal opened the door, his mother standing close behind him. The man offered a small, professional smile and handed the envelope directly to Jamal. "This is for you," he said simply. Jamal hesitated, his fingers brushing the smooth paper. "For me?" The man nodded. "From Mr. Carter. He asked that it be delivered personally." With that, the man turned and walked back to the SUV, climbing in without another word. The vehicle pulled away as quietly as it had arrived, leaving Jamal and his mother standing in the doorway, stunned. "What is it?" his mother asked, eyeing the envelope with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. Jamal opened it carefully. Inside was an embossed invitation to a prestigious charity gala, complete with elegant gold lettering and intricate detailing. Along with the invitation was a handwritten note from Mr. Carter. "Jamal, your kindness did not go unnoticed. I would like you and your family to join me as my honored guests at this event. Details are enclosed. I look forward to seeing you. Richard Carter." Jamal's heart raced as he read the note aloud. His siblings, who had gathered around to listen, erupted with excitement. "We're going to a fancy party," his little brother exclaimed, eyes wide with wonder. But Jamal's mother remained cautious. "This seems unusual," she said, her tone wary. "Why would he invite us? We don't even know him." Jamal shrugged, equally confused. "I don't know, but he seemed genuine when I helped him. Maybe he just wants to thank us." After much discussion, the family decided to accept the invitation. They didn't have much in terms of formal attire, but Jamal's mother managed to borrow a dress from a friend, and Jamal pieced together the nicest outfit he could find. The night of the gala arrived quickly, and as they stood waiting for the car Mr. Carter had sent to pick them up, Jamal couldn't help but feel a mixture of nerves and excitement. When they arrived at the venue, Jamal's breath caught in his throat. The building was grand, with tall marble columns and glittering chandeliers visible through the expansive glass doors. Guests in elegant gowns and sharp suits milled about, their laughter and conversation filling the air. A red carpet stretched across the entrance, and photographers snapped pictures as people arrived. The driver opened their door and Jamal stepped out, feeling painfully out of place among the opulence. His mother and siblings followed, their eyes wide as they took in the scene. As they entered the building, a host greeted them warmly and led them to their seats near the front of the room. Jamal scanned the crowd, searching for Mr. Carter. He spotted him near the stage, engaged in conversation with a group of well-dressed individuals. When their eyes met, Mr. Carter smiled and made his way over. "Jamal," he said warmly, extending a hand. "I'm glad you could make it." Jamal shook his hand, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "Thank you for inviting us, sir. This is incredible." Mr. Carter chuckled. "It's the least I could do. Your act of kindness reminded me of something important, and I wanted to acknowledge that." Before Jamal could respond, the lights dimmed and the crowd quieted. A spotlight illuminated the stage, and Mr. Carter gestured for Jamal to follow him. "Come with me," he said. Jamal hesitated, glancing back at his family, but his mother gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, he followed Mr. Carter to the stage. As they stepped into the spotlight, A hush fell over the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Carter began, his voice steady and commanding, "tonight, we're here to celebrate not just generosity but the power of kindness to change lives. I'd like to introduce you to someone who embodies that spirit. This is Jamal." The audience turned their attention to Jamal, who shifted nervously under their gaze. Mr. Carter continued, recounting their brief encounter with vivid detail. He spoke of how Jamal had stopped to help a stranger without expecting anything in return, and how that simple act had left a profound impact. "What Jamal didn't know, Mr. Carter said, his voice thick with emotion, is that I grew up in a neighborhood just like his. I know what it's like to face challenges, to dream of a better future while feeling like the odds are stacked against you. When I met Jamal, I saw not just a young man with remarkable character, but a reflection of where I came from." Jamal felt his heart swell as he listened. He hadn't realized how much their encounter had meant to Mr. Carter. The businessman turned to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And to honor Jamal, and to give others like him the opportunities they deserve, I'm proud to announce the creation of the Jamal Foundation, a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth who show extraordinary kindness and determination. It's my way of paying forward the kindness that once helped me get to where I am today." The room erupted in applause, the sound almost deafening. Jamal stood frozen, trying to process what he had just heard. His mind raced with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. He turned to Mr. Carter, his voice trembling. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Mr. Carter replied with a smile. "Just keep being the person you are." When the applause died down, Jamal was handed a microphone. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "I never expected anything like this to happen," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I just did what I thought was right. My mom always says that kindness doesn't cost anything, and she's right. But what I've learned is that it can mean everything to someone else." He paused, glancing at his family and the audience. "I want to thank my mom for teaching me to always help others, and I want to thank Mr. Carter for believing in me. This foundation, it's not just about me. It's about helping others like me realize that where you come from doesn't have to define where you're going." The crowd rose to their feet, their applause thunderous. Jamal felt a lump in his throat as he handed the microphone back and stepped off the stage. His family rushed to meet him, their faces beaming with pride. That night, as they rode home, Jamal gazed out the window, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of color. The events of the evening felt surreal, like a dream he never wanted to wake up from. But more than anything, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Mr. Carter's gesture had shown him that even small acts of kindness could ripple outwards, creating change far beyond what he could see. And in that moment, Jamal knew that his journey was just beginning. The ride back home after the gala was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence that comes from discomfort. It was the kind of silence that follows something extraordinary, when everyone is too lost in their thoughts to speak. Jamal stared out the window as the city lights passed by, his mind replaying the events of the evening. The applause, Mr. Carter's words, and the overwhelming feeling of being recognized in a way he never imagined, it all felt like a dream. Beside him, his mother sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression a mixture of pride and awe. When they arrived back in their neighborhood, the quiet streets greeted them with an almost eerie calm. But as they stepped out of the car, Jamal noticed something unusual. A few of their neighbors were outside, waiting. Word of Jamal's recognition had spread quickly, and their small community, often overlooked by the larger city, had come together to celebrate one of their own. Jamal, Mrs. Harris, the elderly woman from 2 houses down, called out. She shuffled forward with surprising speed, her face glowing with excitement. "We heard what happened. A scholarship fund named after you. That's incredible, my boy." Others joined in, offering congratulations and kind words. Jamal felt a mix of embarrassment and gratitude as he shook hands and exchanged smiles. His younger siblings beamed with pride, basking in their brother's newfound recognition. For so long, their family had felt invisible, just another struggling household in a sea of many. But now, for the first time, they felt seen. The next day at school, Jamal experienced a similar shift. Normally he slipped through the hallways unnoticed, just another student trying to make it through the day. But now, heads turned as he walked by, and whispers followed in his wake. "That's him," someone murmured. "The guy Mr. Carter talked about." Even his teachers treated him differently, their usual indifference replaced by a newfound respect. Mr. Lopez, his math teacher, pulled him aside after class. "Jamal," he said, his voice warm, "I always knew you had potential, but now the whole city knows it too. If there's anything you need recommendations, tutoring, just let me know. I'd be honored to help." Jamal thanked him, his cheeks flushing. It was overwhelming, this sudden attention, but it also lit a fire within him. For the first time, he began to believe that his dreams of becoming an engineer weren't just distant fantasies, but achievable goals. The transformation in Jamal's life didn't stop there. A few days later, the black SUV returned, drawing the now familiar attention of his neighbors. This time, however, it wasn't just a driver. Mr. Carter himself stepped out, dressed in a more casual yet still impeccably tailored outfit. He greeted Jamal and his family warmly before making an announcement that left them stunned. "I'd like to visit your school, Jamal," he said. "I think your story can inspire others to see the power of kindness and perseverance." Jamal's principal, thrilled at the prospect of hosting someone as influential as Mr. Carter, quickly arranged an assembly. The entire student body gathered in the gymnasium, buzzing with excitement. When Mr. Carter took the stage, the room fell silent. He spoke with the same confidence and sincerity Jamal had witnessed at the gala, recounting their encounter and emphasizing the importance of small acts of kindness. "It's not about grand gestures," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "It's about doing what you can, where you are, with what you have." Jamal reminded me of that, and I hope his story reminds all of you. Jamal was invited to join him on stage, and though he felt nervous, he stood tall. The applause that followed was thunderous, and as he looked out at his peers, he saw admiration in their eyes. For the first time, he felt like more than just another kid from a struggling neighborhood. He felt like a role model. The days that followed were filled with opportunities Jamal never thought he'd have. Local organizations reached out, offering mentorship programs and workshops. One engineering firm even sent him a kit for building and programming small robots, encouraging him to explore his passion further. Jamal dove into these opportunities with enthusiasm, eager to learn and grow. But while his own life was changing, Jamal couldn't help but think about the kids in his neighborhood who weren't as lucky. He knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to dream big but feel trapped by circumstances. And so, inspired by Mr. Carter's example, Jamal decided to give back. He started small, organizing weekend sessions in the community center where he taught younger kids how to build simple machines using everyday materials. At first, only a few kids showed up, but word spread quickly. Soon the room was packed with eager faces, all looking to Jamal for guidance. He found joy in their curiosity and determination, and it fueled his own drive to succeed. One day, as he walked home from one of these sessions, he passed the old corner store where he had first spotted Mr. Carter's car. The memory stopped him in his tracks, and for a moment he stood there, lost in thought. He remembered how ordinary that day had seemed at first, how he had almost walked past without stopping. What if he hadn't offered to help? What if he had dismissed the opportunity as someone else's problem? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. It was a reminder of how small choices could ripple outward, creating changes far beyond what he could see. As he continued walking, Jamal felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for what he had gained, but for the journey that had brought him here. His mind wandered further back, to the struggles his family had faced. He thought of the nights when his mother had come home late, exhausted but still smiling for her children. He thought of the times when he had given up his own small comforts to make sure his siblings had what they needed. Those moments had been hard, but they had also shaped him into the person he was today. One evening, as he sat with his mother in their living room, he shared these thoughts with her. "Do you ever think about how things could have been different?" he asked quietly. "If I hadn't helped Mr. Carter, or if he hadn't stopped that day?" His mother looked at him, her eyes soft with affection. "Life is full of what-ifs, Jamal," she said. "But you can't dwell on them. What matters is what you do with the opportunities you're given. And you've done more than I ever could have imagined." Her words stayed with him, grounding him as his life continued to change. Over time, Jamal became a fixture in the community, not just as a mentor, but as a symbol of what was possible. His story inspired others to dream bigger, to take chances, and to help one another. The scholarship fund Mr. Carter had established began to make a tangible impact as well. Several kids from Jamal's school were selected as its first recipients, their lives forever changed by the opportunities it provided. Jamal attended the ceremonies for each of them, offering words of encouragement and advice. Watching them step into new possibilities filled him with pride and a sense of fulfillment. Through it all, Jamal remained humble. He knew that his journey wasn't over, that there was still so much he wanted to accomplish. But he also knew that he wasn't alone. He had his family, his community, and the lessons he had learned along the way. And as he looked to the future, he felt a sense of hope that burned brighter than ever before. One day, as he sat at his desk working on a design for a robotics competition, he glanced at the small business card that still sat in the corner of the drawer. It was worn now, the edges slightly frayed from being handled so many times. But it was a reminder of where it all began, one simple act of kindness that had changed everything. With a smile, Jamal picked up his pencil and returned to his work, his mind buzzing with ideas. He didn't know exactly where life would take him, but he knew one thing for certain: he would keep paying the kindness forward, one small act at a time. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the neighborhood as Jamal returned home from another successful workshop with the kids at the community center. His heart was full, but his body ached with the pleasant fatigue that comes from a day spent doing something meaningful. As he walked up the worn steps to their modest home, he noticed a familiar black SUV parked in front. His chest tightened slightly with anticipation. Mr. Carter was back. Jamal stepped inside to find his family gathered in the living room, their expressions a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Mr. Carter stood with his usual composed demeanor, but there was a hint of warmth in his smile as he looked at Jamal. Beside him, through the window, Jamal noticed something unusual: a gleaming silver car parked behind the SUV. It was simple but modern, with clean lines and a spacious design. "Jamal," Mr. Carter began, motioning toward the car, "I wanted to do something more for your family. I know how much you all do for each other, and I also know that getting around hasn't always been easy. This is my gift to you, a reliable car to make things just a little bit easier." For a moment the room was silent, the weight of Mr. Carter's words sinking in. Jamal's mother brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes shimmering with tears. His siblings squealed with delight, already imagining the adventures they could have with their new family car. But Jamal, though grateful, shook his head slightly. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "thank you. This means a lot to us, more than I can even say. But the real gift you've given me isn't something that runs on four wheels. It's the chance to believe in myself, to dream bigger, and to make a difference for others. That's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." Mr. Carter's smile widened, his eyes reflecting a quiet pride. "And that's exactly why I believe in you, Jamal," he replied. "You've already proven that you know how to make the most of what you're given. I have no doubt you'll continue to inspire others with your kindness and determination." The family spent the rest of the evening exploring their new car, taking turns sitting in the driver's seat and marveling at the features. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate them, and laughter filled the air. For a family that had weathered so many storms together, this moment felt like a celebration not just of their new gift but of how far they had come. A few weeks later, Jamal stood backstage at a community event organized by the scholarship foundation that now bore his name. The room was filled with people: parents, students, teachers, and community leaders, all gathered to celebrate the power of education and resilience. Jamal adjusted the microphone clip to his shirt, his palms slightly sweaty. Public speaking still made him nervous, but this time it was different. He wasn't just speaking for himself, he was speaking for everyone who believed in the power of kindness to transform lives. When his name was called, Jamal stepped onto the stage, the applause washing over him like a wave. He paused for a moment, scanning the crowd. His family sat in the front row, their faces beaming with pride. And just behind them, Mr. Carter sat with his usual composed demeanor, nodding slightly in encouragement. "Good evening, everyone," Jamal began, his voice steady despite the fluttering in his chest. "I want to start by thanking you all for being here and for supporting something that means so much to me. A few months ago, I could never have imagined standing here. Back then, I was just a kid running errands for my mom, dreaming of a better future, but not really knowing how to get there." He paused, letting the words settle. "And then something happened, something small but life-changing. I stopped to help someone with a flat tire. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but that simple act of kindness set off a chain of events that brought me here today." Jamal's voice grew stronger as he continued, his confidence building. "What I've learned is that kindness is powerful. It doesn't take much, just a moment of your time, a little effort, and a willingness to care. But that small act can ripple outward in ways you can't even imagine. It can open doors, change lives, and inspire others to do the same." He looked directly at the younger kids in the audience, many of whom were scholarship recipients. "I want you to know that no matter where you come from, no matter how tough things might seem, you have the power to make a difference. Not just for yourself, but for the people around you. Don't ever underestimate what you can do." The room erupted into applause, and Jamal felt a swell of emotion as he stepped back from the microphone. He had spoken from the heart, and the response was more than he could have hoped for. As he returned to his seat, Mr. Carter rose to shake his hand. "You've come a long way, Jamal," he said, his voice quiet but filled with pride. "And I have no doubt you'll go even further." That evening, as the event came to a close, Jamal found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. It hadn't been an easy one, but every challenge, every moment of doubt had shaped him into the person he was now. He thought about his mother's unwavering support, his siblings' endless enthusiasm, and the community that had rallied around him. Most of all, he thought about Mr. Carter and the way their chance encounter had changed everything. As Jamal walked to the edge of the stage to take one last look at the room, he felt a sense of peace and purpose. The event had been a success, not just because of the funds raised or the speeches given, but because it had brought people together. It had reminded everyone that change starts with individuals, with simple acts of kindness that grow into something far greater. Before leaving, Jamal turned to address the audience one final time. "I want to leave you all with this thought," he said. "Kindness doesn't just change the lives of those you help, it changes you too. It gives you the strength to face challenges, the courage to dream big, and the heart to keep going no matter what. So, the next time you see someone who needs help, take a moment to stop and lend a hand. You never know where it might lead." He smiled, stepping back as the applause rose again, this time accompanied by cheers. The energy in the room was electric, and Jamal felt a deep sense of fulfillment as he walked off the stage. Mr. Carter was waiting for him, his hand outstretched. "Well done," he said simply, but the pride in his eyes spoke volumes. As they walked out of the building together, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Jamal felt more certain than ever that this was just the beginning. His journey wasn't just about achieving his own dreams anymore, it was about inspiring others to believe in theirs. Have you ever experienced how one small act of kindness can change a life? Share your story in the comments below, we'd love to hear it. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us all of the incredible power of kindness and resilience. Together, we can create a ripple of change that reaches far and wide.